Francis Ngannou back in the news. Now, I got to tell you, Francis is possibly and probably my favorite sports topic of 2023. But when Francis' name surfaced in the news yesterday is when I realized I haven't heard Francis' name in the news lately, right? Which is a miss. It was Eddie Hearn brought it up. Eddie Hearn was talking to Ariel Helwani as part of the MMA 4.5 hour program. So he says, talking about himself, he said, I reached out to Francis's team about a potential fight with Anthony Joshua, and I never heard back. And I don't know why Eddie Hearn would ever say I didn't hear back. Like, I don't know why he would use that language, unless he really didn't hear back and he really was exhausted his options and thought he would just go to the media about it. So, far moreover, is what do you do with Francis Ngannou? And what do you do with him? Do you think he'll ever fight in the PFL? Do you think he'll ever fight MMA? I realize those two will go together, but what if he doesn't fight MMA? And if he isn't calling Anthony Joshua back, and I would like to see that fight, by the way. I really would like to see that fight. I would assume if he's not calling him back, that he's got a bird in the hand somewhere. And whether that is the discussions going with Wilder or Fury after Fury Usyk, he's got something. Francis is sitting on some kind of a card. Francis in MMA really is a fascinating topic, though. I mean, when you do the merger of Bellator and PFL, there is no fight as glaringly obvious if we're going to move everything aside except for hard and fast competition. There is no match that is so glaringly obvious as Francis versus Ryan Bader. You have the Bellator champion versus the UFC champion. It's as close to a co-promote as you can get. At this time last year, Francis was the UFC heavyweight champion. He never lost that belt in competition. And that would be a very interesting angle. But the perception of Francis has changed to where he's not viewed as the unbeaten king of MMA, which is what he was. But he's not viewed as that anymore, right? Like if I could back you up a year, if I could back you up to the day before he fought Fury, I could sell you quickly on the idea of Francis versus Bader. Now, you might think that Bader's going to win. You might think Francis is going to have an easy time, but I could sell you on the idea of wanting to see it. The byproduct of Francis going out and showing what a skilled boxer he is that he's now living in this very weird juxtaposition where he is only a boxer, and Bader, who's a wrestler, therefore would just tackle him and beat him up like it was 1993. And it would be very hard for that fight to cultivate. I mean, you will not see that headline anywhere. Ryan Bader himself has not mentioned the headline because it is so glaringly not going to happen. And it would just seem if there was any two guys that would pop off the page and we're going to have to put together because we did this merger and we did the merger for a reason, like there would be no way around making or feinting that you were going to make that fight. And it has not even been discussed. Now, the most compelling matchup for Francis, for the way Francis fights, easily the most compelling matchup is Czech Congo. But that's another one that's not being discussed, not in the slightest. And that comes back to Francis being an MMA king that never went down. Should be the reigning boxing king, according to many people that watched the match, who never went down. So he's found himself in this weird juxtaposition. There's just a perception. I don't know who would win between Bader and Francis. That's a very interesting fight. I know that we all thought that Francis was going to deal with wrestlers, but then you insert Cain Velasquez. Right? I mean, it's one of these situations. Or you insert Stipe Miocic part 2 when he couldn't take him down, right? Like, things change. But perception and your memories appeared to go faster than any perception did. So we can't do Francis and Bader. That's just going to ruin Francis. That's awful. That's a terrible idea. We can't do that. Okay, great. Then let's put him with the opposite. Let's put him with somebody that isn't on as big of a win streak. Let's put him with somebody that isn't wrestling heavy, but in fact is stand-up heavy. And let's put him with Chet Congo. Makes all the sense in the world. Not to mention two guys that are made for a poster. This works. Well, no, we can't do that either. Did you see the problem? And it's a tricky one. Boxing doesn't have to deal with this. Now, boxing does have to deal with things that we don't. MMA has made losing acceptable, just by example. You lose 5 fights in boxing, you're never main eventing again. You lose 10 fights, you're a bum. You might not even get a license. So boxing has its own struggles, but if you're going to do what's known as a squash match, where you got one guy and he's a killer, it could be Mike Tyson. You can bring in the dude that pretended to get knocked out from a slice of Pizza Hut deep dish. And you're going to sell out an arena and do real well on pay-per-view. It was just a different theme and a different idea for a squash match in that sport. And I don't know why we haven't heard from Francis. But I do think that it's a very interesting observation that I'm making for you right now. Francis was the champion of the world in MMA and did not lose that belt. So the UFC champion versus the Bellator champion, which has been discussed for years, but there was no way to make it happen, can finally happen, but there's no discussion of making it happen. And that purely has to do with the idea that Ryan Bader will ruin everything. And the idea that Francis can't deal with Bader in any capacity fully comes from you seeing how well he did against Fury, as opposed to Francis achieving what he set out to do, which is to show you I'm the best over here and I am the best over here. Our minds just seem to stay stuck on whatever it is that we saw last. And it's not fair to anybody. It makes the matchups overly and exceedingly more difficult. But there isn't a matchup that's being discussed for MMA. And now Eddie Hearn says I can't get him to talk about Joshua. So by elimination, it would put Fury and Wilder on the table. I am not sold that Fury would want to do that match again, nor do I believe that he needs to do that match again. It would seem like some other boxer would need to step up. Like if they're going to use the whole Fury, you don't have the courage. Well, he had more courage than any other boxer alive did. So if we're going to say that Fury doesn't have the courage to fight Francis a second time, I think that now it's incumbent on somebody else. And it seems like all signs are pointing to Wilder.